The parable of the Good Samaritan in Luke's Gospel, chapter 10, starting at verse 25. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbour as yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this and you will live." But to justify himself, he asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbour?" In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, where he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he travelled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. 'Look after him,' he said, 'and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have.' Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbour to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?" The expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." I was recently reading the memoirs of an old politician called Tony Benn, and he was a radical. He had many radical ideas, but he was really interested in the parable of the Good Samaritan, and it inspired a lot of his political work. And he said about it, the Good Samaritan was less concerned with the personal salvation of the traveller who was stripped and beaten than he was with the immediate need for medical treatment, accommodation and food in this world, here and now. Unless Christians can respond institutionally and politically, their faith can become an escape from reality, and indeed an escape from the challenge Jesus posed himself. In a world characterised by brutal repression and exploitation under regimes of all kinds, Christian escapism is no more acceptable than it was on the road to Jericho. Today we're looking at how do we respond to societal failure? How do we respond to systemic injustice as followers of Jesus? A friend of mine also had an interesting comment I thought about the parable of the Good Samaritan, and he said that he saw his own role as an innkeeper. This friend runs the Christian Health Association of Malawi, which means he oversees all the Christian hospitals and clinics of Malawi, and he thought, my role is the innkeeper. I'm the one when you bring the person to us, I'm there. What do you think about the parable of the Good Samaritan? How do you think it challenges us? What does it mean to you? And should we be responding to it? Our actions as individuals affect others. We all know that. And the parable of the Good Samaritan is saying more than just that. But let's start there for now, right? There are different levels of our actions that affect others. There are like the direct ones we do, there are indirect things, there are stuff we're conscious of and stuff we're not aware of. So, this is all to help us unpack the social failure thing and see how the parable of the Good Samaritan could speak into it a bit. Imagine a situation in which a prince has never been out of a castle. Now, so those of you who've heard videos I've done before for groups and are now smirking because I always have some kind of slightly metaphorical, symbolic parable kind of thing, I can only apologise. You're just going to have to sit through this. Use your imagination. This is important. Right. A situation in which a prince is in a castle, right? And all day long in this castle, he's brought the finest wines known to humanity. He's brought the finest foods known to the world. And he is stuffed and gorged and happy and comfortable. And all the courtiers are too scared to tell him that outside the walls of his castle, there is a lot of upset and hurt and poverty. In fact, they're stealing the food from the farmers that are in his own country. The prince knows nothing about any of this. And he doesn't even know how to ask a question about it because he's never been educated to find out about things that are beyond his castle that he could deal with. He's only ever been shown people that are happy and well, because when he goes out, people take him to the places that are nice. They take him to the villages that are happy and well fed. They take him to the countryside, which is beautiful and not destroyed. So, when we think about this prince, what is his level of responsibility to his country? Does he have any? Well, is it really his fault? I think most of us would think, on the gut reaction, he has some responsibility. Now, maybe he can't be fully blamed for the system in which he's a part, but he carries something, but so do the courtiers. And he might even say, so do the farmers, but they don't have much because they can't respond. There's nothing they can do about it. It's been stolen from them, but maybe they should say something. Be a bit harsh, but maybe you think that. The courtiers definitely have something responsible because they're controlling the situation. Perhaps you even think they have the most responsibility. The prince himself definitely carries something, but this might not be determined exactly what level. And this is quite important when we think about social injustice, the societal failure, because we all know that society isn't perfect and we all know that the world isn't perfect, but we don't know about what our level of responsibility always is to everyone else, and what should we really do about it, and how much should we do, and what should we be not doing. Those are really hard questions, but as a starting basis, we want to say at a gut level, there is something we carry here. It's not all individual. As the famous poem goes, no man is an island. So, what do we do about it? If we are responsible in some way, is that sin? Well, first and foremost, I want to remind us, our job as Christians is not to manage sin. It's not to manage individual sin, and it's not to manage social sin. That is not the point of our discipleship. Now, the way you can see that is if you think about the Levite. So in the story, the Levite is a kind of an authoritative religious figure, someone that would have been seen as wise and important, and someone to be probably obeyed and thought of as having great status and standing. And obviously that person walks on by when he sees the Good Samaritan. Now, it may be that in this story, Jesus is alluding to the idea that he might not have wanted to touch the body and be unclean. And that's maybe what's going on. Maybe he didn't want to touch the blood of the person that was hurt and had been beaten up. So he walks on by. That Levite is managing sin, not responding to the things that he's seeing around him. We're not looking at managing sin when we're talking about societal failure on our place and responsibility in it. Our job is not to sort out our own sin and start to feel suddenly guilty about 1,000 new things, because Jesus has dealt with that. Jesus dealt with our individual sin, but he's also dealt with our social sin. The result of that, I hope, is greater freedom to respond to the needs around us, because Jesus is calling us into a life not of duty to certain kinds of rules to put us in right standing with God, but because he's put us in right standing with God. Our opportunity is to seek his kingdom. Our job is to follow him. It's to learn his patterns, to learn his walk. It's to follow where he goes. And this is the thing about Jesus, and you'll see this across all the Gospels. He's often walking where no one else is. He's going off the beaten track. If you think about the prince who just goes to the nice village and the nice bit of countryside, Jesus is cutting off those routes. He's seeing more. He's going to the people that are forgotten or deliberately neglected and rejected and beaten back by the world. He's going to the dislocated, the discriminated against, the judged. He's going to those being abused by those with status. He's the one calling against the figures of esteem. You who has not sinned, cast the first stone. Against the woman who was being harmed because of what she has done and how she has been shamed socially. So, you can look at stories across the Gospels of that. Go to them, look at them. How does Jesus, not now, I don't mean, but how does Jesus go out and away from the normal routes of society? How does he go to the least and last and lost? How does he find them? Does he? If you see in the TV show The Chosen, everyone's always referencing at some point. It looks even like they kind of interpret it like he actually takes longer routes to find people that need him. And his question to his disciples at the beginning of the Gospel of John is, what do you want? Jesus, his walk, and if we follow it, is going to go to places that we wouldn't otherwise have gone. So in social sin, what does that mean? Well, it means that we look at the Good Samaritan who could stop in his tracks and respond to need. So too is Jesus going to challenge our paths and stop us in our tracks and bring us into responding to need, bring us into challenging injustice, bring us into challenging harm. So, even the prince that we talked about, that fictional prince, could be forgiven. Jesus can deal with that. The thing with the prince is he never chooses to seek anything beyond himself or serve anyone else. He is at the centre of his world. But Jesus' kingdom is flipped, because no longer are we at the centre of our own world. Instead, we are dethroned and we put Jesus on the throne. And the personal salvation that Jesus offers is shown to us and outworked by the way he lives. As Jackie Pullinger puts it, Jackie Pullinger was if you read Chasing the Dragon, the book, which is about her setting up work in Hong Kong with addicts and gangsters. It's a great book if you ever have some time to read Chasing the Dragon. She puts it like this: Jesus did not promise running shoes in the hereafter or in heaven. Jesus did not promise running shoes in heaven to the lame man. He made him walk. We are Jesus' ambassadors on earth, and we have to leave the embassy sometime. So, if Jesus is calling us out of our comfort zones, if following him is not about managing social sin, but it is about going to places that ordinarily wouldn't go, if it is about challenging injustice and confronting societal failure and being part of the healing process that he is bringing, being part of his redemption, what causes do we take up? What are we supposed to be doing? So, I think it's a really hard question to answer. Christians over many centuries have been part of all different kinds of causes. Some bad, some amazing. Some, if we think about quite a lot of different kinds of issues, you can find Christians on all sides of it. There isn't a blueprint of a way to respond to social failure or societal failure. We don't want to align ourselves to the popular movement at the moment or a bandwagon just for the sake of it. Our job is our calling is a better way of putting it. Our calling is to align ourselves to the heart of Jesus. And in understanding that, see where it goes. I once met an old, it's a bit harsh, isn't it? He was fairly old. An older Labour Party politician called Peter Mandelson on a train. If any of you know who this guy is, he's like one of the famous architects of New Labour. That's the Tony Blair thing of the late 1990s and the noughties. And I chatted to Peter Mandelson on a train, and I said, "So how do you get into politics? How did you do it?" And he said to me, "Well, it's not about having all the answers. It's about getting involved, and once you've got involved, you learn new things and you can respond." And at the time I was like, well, that sounds like a totally unprincipled way of doing politics. Surely you should have an ideal that you want to work out. And I think that's a bit true, but I also think he had a point. In getting involved in causes of social justice causes, often the best way is to have a heart for something and then to try it. That is actually how Jesus uses his disciples. He sends them out and then he brings them back and asks them, how did it go? What did you learn? Jesus' kingdom is one that is the only one that doesn't last. Sorry, that's the opposite of what I mean. Jesus' kingdom is the only one that lasts. It is the only one that satisfies. The Holy Spirit, though, is acting in history. He's calling our hearts to join in with what he is doing. In Romans 8, it says, creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. You are the children of God. Creation is waiting in eager expectation for you to join in the story of redemption. And you don't need all the answers at the beginning, but you do need to know the heart of the King. So start there. If you're thinking about what causes to join in with, I'd first go to Jesus and spend time with him. Because actually in that place of heart transformation, he will show you things that he cares about. You know, when Tony Benn was saying, if I go back to what I said at the beginning, that the Good Samaritan was less concerned with personal salvation than he was with need for treatment in the world here and now, for food and accommodation. There's some truth in that, but I also think that misses the point, that in personal salvation, in personal transformation in Jesus, we learn his ways, we understand his cares, and he calls us out of ourselves. He teaches us who we are in his sight, how we're loved, and how we can share that love with others. That's the place to start. That's why personal salvation is really important, but it doesn't stop there. So when we're figuring out what the causes we want to join in with, how we can respond, start with who we are in him. What does he care about? What's on his heart? And then when it comes to joining in, like the Peter Mandelson's thing said, you can't get the total ideal, but you can join in. Ask yourselves, what's the fruit of this cause or activity or organisation? What does Jesus say about the particular issue? Can you see him working in it already? What does your conscience say? What's your heart behind it? Who are you helping? What is this particular issue in the Bible? What does it say? Have other Christians been involved in the past? How's that gone? Where would you draw on the line? What other options are there? Reflect on it. We start from the place of knowing Jesus and knowing his heart and knowing something about his kingdom. And that calls us out to act. But then when we learn and we act and we join in with something, you want to go back to him afterwards and go, what do you think about this, Lord? What does the Bible say about this? What can I learn from this? Should I be involved in this? It's a process of moving back and forth between action and reflection that gives us the insight to get involved in challenging societal failure or social injustice. Because again, that's the movement he uses with his disciples. He sends them out and he brings them back and talks to them about it. It doesn't just stop. So, where do we begin? We ask the question, what is he calling you into? What's he already asked you to participate in? And if you can't think of anything, what was the last thing you heard him say? What has stirred your heart? What has inspired you? Now, I do think in this situation, like with the Good Samaritan, doing nothing is not really an option. Walking on by like the Levite and the priest is clearly something that is being challenged in this parable. We can't turn away from those in need because, for whatever reason, we are afraid of doing something or don't want to be disrupted or feel like that we have too many things on our plate already. The need's in front of us. And Jesus says, go and do the same. Go and show that mercy. So doing nothing's not really an option. Jesus says, go and make disciples of all nations. But getting it perfectly right is unlikely. Yeah, you might. But it's not, because we're not trying to take control of a system or rid ourselves of some social sin. This is an invitation to personal transformation. As you join in and get your hands dirty, you're working with him towards his vision of the world. And there's something beautiful about how you learn who you are and who others are and who Jesus is in that process. As a finish, I'm going to read Isaiah 58 again, which is my favourite Bible verse, Bible passage, because I think it inspires us to get involved. The question I want to leave you with afterwards is, what is God calling you to get involved in? What has he asked you to participate in? And what would you like to see change? Isaiah 58. Shout it aloud. Do not hold back. Raise your voice like a trumpet. Declare to my people their rebellion, and to the descendants of Jacob their sins. For day after day they seek me out. They seem eager to know my ways, as if they were a nation that does what is right and has not forsaken the commands of its God. They ask me for just decisions and seem eager for God to come near them. Why have we fasted, they say, and you have not seen it? Why have we humbled ourselves, and you have not noticed? Yet on the day of your fasting, you do as you please and exploit all your workers. Your fasting ends in quarrelling and strife, and in striking each other with wicked fists. You cannot fast as you do today and expect your voice to be heard on high. Is this the kind of fasting I have chosen? Only a day for people to humble themselves? Is it only for bowing one's head like a reed and for lying in sackcloth and ashes? Is that what you call a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord? Is not this the kind of fasting I have chosen? To loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke? Is it not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter, when you see the naked to clothe them, and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood? Then your light will break forth like the dawn, and your healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Then you will call, and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help, and he will say, Here I am. If you do away with the yoke of oppression, with the pointing finger and malicious talk, if you spend yourselves on behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness and your night will become like the noonday. The Lord will guide you always. He will satisfy your needs in a sun-scorched land, and he will strengthen your frame. You will be like a well-watered garden, like a spring whose waters never fail.